Hi everyone, it's officially eclipse season and I wanted to talk about eclipses, all the way from the astronomical basics to the astrological delineations. So let's get right into it. What are the lunar nodes? The lunar nodes are the 2 points where the moon's orbit intersects the ecliptic. But what's the ecliptic? The ecliptic is the sun's yearly path, or rather the sun's apparent yearly path, because of course the sun does not move, but from the perspective of the earth we look at the sun's path, and of course the moon is also revolving around the earth, and the 2 points where their orbits interact and intersect are the lunar nodes. The lunar nodes have a retrograde motion because this is all from the perspective of the Earth, and from Earth they appear to move in a backward motion. You may observe in the diagram that the descending node or the south node is actually at the top, while the ascending or the north node is at the bottom. This is because the descending node is where the moon starts descending, and it's also where the moon is entering the southern ecliptic hemisphere, and thus it's called the south node, even though the diagram it appears to be at the top. And similarly, the ascending node is where the moon starts ascending in the orbit and where it's starting to enter the northern ecliptic hemisphere, and that's why it's called the north node. That was some handy astronomy, and now let's talk about the astrology of the lunar nodes. We can even divide this into two sections, where one is the traditional significations while the other are the modern significations. Now, of course, they're both important, but we must understand where the mythology and the stories of the nodes come from. A lot of different parts of the world have their own stories about the nodes, but a common one is that the nodes represent a dragon, where the north node is the dragon's head and the south node is the dragon's tail. And because of this, the north node is associated with striving for something, things that we desire, the things we crave, the things we're always moving towards. It's like an insatiable hunger because it's the dragon's head. While the south node, on the other hand, is the dragon's tail. So it's something that we are moving away from, something we don't want, something we want less of, and something that we just want to remove from our lives and just let go of. Due to these significations, the north node often signifies an increase, while the south node signifies a decrease. Now, this can be an increase or decrease of good or bad things depending on what the aspects the planets are making. But it is very interesting to see the traditional roots of these points and how ancient astrologers used to interpret them. In modern astrology, the nodes have a little bit of a different meaning. While ancient astrologers had a little bit more grounded approach to the nodes while maintaining their intensity, modern astrology looks at the nodes in a more mystical way, or at least more mystical than the ancient astrologers, because a lot of modern astrologers associate the nodes with our karma or our past lives, or the future and the past, which is in its own right a very interesting way to interpret the nodes. A lot of modern astrologers interpret the south node as the things that come easily to us, the things that we already possess, while the north node are the things that don't come easy for us and the things we need to work harder for, and these are the things we're striving for. This is where we want to go. So the south node is where we come from and the north node is where we want to go. The south node is our past while the north node is our future. So in this sense, the ancient and the modern interpretations of the nodes do have some common ground. When we combine these different types of approaches, we get to look at the nodes in a very brilliant light and we get to understand them on a deeper level. I would highly recommend that you read the ancient stories around the nodes and eclipses, as well as reading what modern interpretations have to say for them and how different types of astrologers interpret the nodes, the eclipses, and just the nodal cycles. Let's talk about eclipses. What is an eclipse? A lunar eclipse occurs during a full moon and when the full moon is near the nodes, while a solar eclipse occurs when the new moon is near one of the nodes. Both astronomically and astrologically, eclipses are a grand event because it is just something so amazing and so brilliant to just look up at the sky and see the sun covered by the moon or see the moon turn red. It is something that ancient people have been looking at and being scared of or being mesmerized by, and as astrologers we get to interpret how these eclipses affect us. Before we get into what eclipses signify, I want to talk about the nodal cycles. The nodes stay in a sign for 18 months, which is approximately a year and a half. Nodes always move as a pair and therefore they're always on an axis. So if one node is in Virgo, the other node will be in Pisces, and they're always moving together. And that is the beauty of the nodes because they're always forming an axis. So when they're affecting us, they're affecting a house axis in our chart. So it's not just one house but the other. So there's this push and pull, there's a merging of themes, and it's always interesting and always important to remember that they all operate on an axis. The nodes enter a new sign and they activate a new theme for us. So as we can see in this graphic I made, I want to talk about how these themes become prominent over a nodal cycle. So it all begins with the nodes entering a new sign axis. That's when these new themes start to emerge. Whatever house axis the nodes enter for us, those themes become very prominent. These themes are going to be prominent for the entire 18-month period that the nodes are in those signs, but they will become more and more intense as we approach eclipse season. What is eclipse season? Eclipse season starts on the full moon or the new moon right before the eclipse and ends on the full moon or new moon right after the eclipse. Let's take the example of the upcoming eclipses. Eclipse season started on 10th March during the new moon in Pisces, and it will end on 23rd April during the full moon in Scorpio. Now this chunk of period between these two lunations is eclipse season. And this is when the themes become more prominent and more intense. If you've observed in the past, you will see that this is when energy starts to pick up. Weird things start to happen. And it's not always weird like you see a ghost or something. It's weird in a way where things are just different. Like you're going to hear stories from people around you of the things happening to them. And they're just going to seem odd. You'll be like, what? That's so random. And you will often notice that this happens during eclipse season because it's the energy of the air. When people ask what's in the air during eclipse season, it is eclipse season. It's that eclipse energy where things may feel more significant and sometimes even more chaotic or intense. Finally, we have the actual eclipses. This is when the energy is at its highest. And the most prominent energy is between two eclipses. If we look at the current example, the energy between 25th March and 8th April, the time between two eclipses will be the highest. This will feel like being in the eye of the storm. This is when things are the most chaotic. And after eclipse season ends, things start to slow down, they get calmer, and we may still be experiencing those nodal themes, but they're kind of in the background. It's only when eclipse season starts that these things, the story, it starts to pick up. It's like the eclipse season is like the build up to the climax, and the eclipses are the climax. So you can think about how in a movie, when it's a climax scene, the energy is high and so many things are happening that are vital to the story. And that's what we feel between these two eclipses. Between any two eclipses, energy will be high and intense. And it's very important to pay attention to the things that are happening to us, the dreams we are having, the people we're meeting. So that is the general flow of energy and how the themes, the nodal story for us unfolds. It is always present over that 18-month period. It gets in more and more intense as eclipse season starts, and of course we have the climax during the eclipses. And it's very, very interesting to see how the whole story unfolds for us over this 18-month period. So I would highly suggest to pay attention and see what themes are coming up for you, especially during an eclipse. How can we delineate an eclipse for ourselves? Of course, we all know to look at the houses that the eclipse is happening in and what is the ruler of the eclipse and what house that is in. But apart from that, I think the main thing that will determine how an eclipse will go for us is how it's aspecting our personal placements. This is something that we need to check for ourselves or get a personalized reading from an astrologer. Because in general, astrologers can only look at the houses that an eclipse is happening for us and tell us what themes may be highlighted. But at the end of the day, it is essential to look at our own natal chart. And I want to give my own example from my own life. The last eclipses that happened in October, November, those were an interesting time. And I think they're a great example of how the way an eclipse aspects your chart can just completely change the experience for you. So the first eclipse that was in October was squaring my natal ascendant and moon. Now, a square is already a harsh aspect, and a moon and ascendant are a very personal placement. So, of course, during this eclipse, I got sick, and I was pretty sick, and it was not good at all. And it involved my digestion, which is a very lunar thing as well, and it was squaring my moon, and of course, my ascendant, which is again about a physical body, and I got sick. But the next eclipse, which was in Taurus, it was sextile my sun and my natal Jupiter. So it was sextile my Pisces sun and my natal Jupiter in Cancer. And this is when I did my first in person market. And this is where I gave readings in real life for the first time. And it was an amazing experience because I was meeting people. And this is also where I ran into my old friends from school and reconnected with them. And the difference between these two was so stark because these are two consecutive eclipses. And of course, these particular eclipses were in different signs. The first one was on the Libra Aries axis, and the second one was on the Taurus Scorpio axis. And because of that, they were definitely in different signs, which doesn't always happen. And I think that this story is a great testament to the fact that we need to check the aspects to our personal placements. Like the second eclipse in Taurus was in my 11th house. And I was in this market and I was interacting with my community and I reconnected with old friends. So those 11th house themes were there. But because it was sextiling, which is usually a positive aspect, and it was sextiling my Jupiter and Sun, the experience was overall positive and I was having a good time compared to the previous eclipse, which was squaring my placements and I was sick. And I think my story also depicts the two sides of an eclipse. An eclipse will always be significant. Important events will happen, but it's not necessary that they're bad. Sometimes, yes, they will be intense and they will be bad, like getting sick. But sometimes they're going to be significant in a good way, like doing a market where you do readings or reconnecting with old friends. These are all things that are important and significant in my life, and they are fated. They feel very mystical even when they're bad. And that is the beauty of an eclipse, that fated things are going to happen. These are the things that are meant to happen to you. And I often take relief in this fact that at the end of the day, this is a roller coaster, but you are going to end up exactly where you're meant to be. It's the eclipses come and they take you where you're meant to be. And it takes a little bit of adjusting. It can get uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, it is a little bit of a relief because you know it's fated, you know it's meant to happen, and you know you're going to end up wherever you're meant to be. So it's best to just not resist it and just surrender to the tides of the universe. A lot of times, astrologers don't mean to fearmonger about eclipses. They simply want to talk about how intense they are. But at the end of the day, we are humans, and I do want to say that if content about eclipses makes you too anxious, including this video, then it is okay to take a break from astrology. Sometimes astrologers are trying to fearmonger, like the pop astrologers on Instagram Reels, but sometimes an astrologer just wants to talk about the reality of it or their own perception of it, and that can seem a little scary to you. And if it's making you paranoid, take a break from social media or that astrologer or from astrology in itself, because life will happen regardless. Let's talk about how we can delineate an eclipse on a more collective scale, and I'm going to use examples of the upcoming eclipses. We have a lunar eclipse in Libra on 25th March. So the sun is in Aries, ruled by Mars in Pisces, and the moon is in Libra, ruled by Venus in Pisces. So this is very interesting that the moon is ruled by an exalted Venus. I like that. I remember the previous eclipses were ruled by fallen planets, and they weren't the best. So the fact that this one is ruled by an exalted Venus gives me a little bit of hope that it's not going to be as chaotic. Even the sun in Aries is ruled by Mars in Pisces, and Mars is of course a little bit tamer in Pisces because it's a water sign and Mars feels a little bit more gentle and chilled out. What's interesting though is that this eclipse is going to be co-present with Chiron, and Mercury in Aries. So the sun is going to be co-present with Chiron and Mercury in Aries, while the moon will of course be opposing Chiron and Mercury. And to me, Chiron is always a rugged wound. I've often given this example that Chiron feels like when you fall on the road and you kind of skin your knees, and it's like that harsh impact of skidding down the road. And that's what Chiron feels to me. That's the type of pain that Chiron has. And with Mercury and Chiron together, it's a very obvious kind of signification of having arguments, having fights, and just kind of getting mad at people for no reason or for a good reason. So to me, this eclipse is interesting because on one hand, we have this chilled out Piscean energy of kind of going with the flow and chilling out. And on the other hand, we have this Aries energy of kind of being angry or, trying to go fast and, doing things with a lot of momentum to the point where you overwork yourself. So it's going to be interesting how two opposing energies try to find some sort of middle ground. And I think that is going to be a collective theme with this eclipse. Because on one hand, we have all these goals and ambitions that we want to get to, and we try to plan, but as we say, man plans, God laughs. And that is a very, very common thing with eclipses. You can plan all you want, but at the end of the day, something will happen and your plans are going to go to shit. And you will be forced to surrender. And because the eclipse itself is ruled by planets in Pisces, I would highly suggest that you surrender more than you usually do. And you don't resist what's happening. And you try to kind of go with the flow and pay attention to your dreams because they're going to be significant as fuck during this time. I also want to say that it is important to not get into unnecessary fights and to kind of think about the phrase that is pick your battles. Is this something that needs to be brought up? Or, is this something we need to argue about? If yes, how can we do that in a productive way? How can we express our emotions without intentionally hurting the person? Because sometimes we need to figure out if we need to have a fight or if we need to let it go. It's important to use our intuition to figure out what the situation requires instead of kind of going with what our ego wants, or instead of going with what we want to do but deep down we know it's not right. Similarly, the solar eclipse on 8th April is ruled by Mars in Pisces. And this one is fully conjunct Chiron and Mercury. So those themes that I mentioned are gonna come up again. What is interesting is that both these eclipses are of course on the same axis, unlike the previous ones in fall 2023. And these eclipses are on the same axis, and therefore the themes will likely be very similar. And it's going to be the same story that's unfolding instead of two different stories unfolding at the same time. So I would suggest that these are the eclipses where we take the path of least resistance, and to just not resist the places where life is taking us, and to just kind of be okay with whatever happens, practice radical acceptance, and to just be okay with the things that are happening in our life, and to surrender. The first lunar eclipse in Libra is going to be in the first decan of Libra that is ruled by the moon, and that corresponds to the Two of Swords, while at the same time the sun will be in the first decan of Aries, which is the Mars ruled decan, and it corresponds to the Two of Wands. Now, these two cards are very interesting. Of course, they are both tools, so there are themes of a decision or a sense of balance. But there are also themes of believing in something that we can't see with the Two of Swords, to follow our intuition and to kind of be guided with things within us that want the best for us instead of letting our ego take the driver's seat. And with the eclipses being ruled by planets in Pisces, all these themes are further emphasized. Listen to your intuition, let it guide you, believe in something that you can't see. While the sun in Aries has this message of envisioning something greater for us. In the Two of Wands, he's looking at a globe in a sense. And there are these themes of kind of wanting better for ourselves. And I think this is also a collective theme of wanting better for our world. With a world that is in shambles, that is ruled by terrible people who have most of the power, it is important to combine that energy of Aries and that passive energy of Pisces or Libra. It's the energy of fighting and taking a stand and going against the people who wish to harm us, and at the same time envisioning a better future for ourselves and retaining hope in all these terrible times. It's important to not kind of let go and be like, oh, this is just what the world is. It's important to want better for ourselves and believe that we can have something better in our world, even if we can't see it, and to fight for it with full force. The solar eclipse in Aries is at 19 degrees, and it's the second decan of Aries ruled by the sun, which corresponds to the Three of Wands. Now, after the Two of Wands, we have the Three of Wands. And even though the eclipse is in Aries, it's not as fast paced, or rather it's asking us to be less fast paced, because with all these planets in Aries we just want to go for it, but something within us tells us to take it a little slow. The Three of Wands shows someone who is almost contemplating. They are looking at the ships that are moving, but they are still, they are stationary, which is very interesting when you think about that. This is the decan ruled by the sun. The sun is like the person in this card. The sun is stationary while the boats move around it, while the planets move around the sun. So this energy is reminding us that sometimes in all our speed we can get too carried away and do things that are not aligned with ourselves. So this eclipse may be giving a bit of a collective message to just stand still for a moment and to take things in, because as someone with Mars in Aries, I know what it's like to always be working and to always be striving for the next thing, which is interesting because the North Node is in Aries too, of course, and the North Node always wants to strive. And with planets in Aries, it's like you're striving for something and you keep going after the next goal. You achieve one thing and it's the next, and then it's the next. And you never have time to stop and smell the roses and to just take in where you are in life. So I want to remind you, this is something my friend Priyanka said. She's a lovely tarot reader. She said to me that there is no finish line. And I needed to hear that, because with all this Martian energy, you always keep on working and striving for something. But we need to remind ourselves to be present, to take in, to let the things happen around us. Like this person is standing at the cliff and admiring the view. He may feel a little sense of FOMO that, oh, everybody else is moving, but I'm still. But we need to change that perspective, and we need to realize that sometimes it's very important to be still, to take in where we are, what has happened so far, to reflect on it, to think about where we want to go next, and to just find a moment of calm, because this is life. You can always keep striving for the next thing, but you may forget in the process to actually live life. So it is essential to just stop and take everything in, go out in nature and to just be. Subscribe for more content on astrology, tarot, and spirituality, and happy eclipsing.